seeking a solution. There's a global effort to find a vaccine for the coronavirus. What President Donald Trump is saying about a timetable in the United States. Back to work. Senators returned to Capitol Hill today, a preview of their agenda. Opening prayers. A Catholic cathedral in Germany holds its first Mass following a weeks-long COVID-19 lockdown. And hearing voices. Pope Francis tells the faithful how to distinguish messages from God from those of the devil. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, May 4th, 2020. Good evening, and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Donald Trump says the nation could see a COVID-19 vaccine in the not-too-distant future. The pandemic has killed more than 249,000 people worldwide, including more than 68,000 right here in the United States. Correspondent Owen Jensen reports now from the White House. Owen.
As the world awaits a vaccine here at the White House, President Trump is confident there will be one. At the same time, there's no doubt who the U.S. blames for the international disaster.
The pandemic and the frustration continue.
End this darn shutdown. It's unconstitutional. It's killing more people than you think you're saving.
But remaining optimistic, President Donald Trump believes a vaccine could arrive by year's end. Tweeting out today, getting great reviews finally for how well we are handling the pandemic, especially our strong production of desperately needed ventilators, the building of field hospitals and beds, and soon the great things we are doing on testing. People are really working well together. At the same time, however, acknowledging the U.S. death toll may go as high as 100,000. And while states loosen restrictions,
if we open up too soon, we're going to see a resurgence of cases, a lot more people getting sick and dying, and we're going to have to shut back down again.
Meanwhile, stocks open lower as tensions worsen between the U.S. and China. U.S. officials believe China covered up the extent of the outbreak.
It's no secret that China mishandled this situation.
And while President Trump focuses on the virus, the election season in full swing too. His campaign continues attacking Joe Biden. The group Catholics for Trump criticized Biden's support for taxpayer dollars to pay for abortions.
What it certainly looks like is his ambitions to be president meant that he had to throw aside the Hyde Amendment. He didn't even do that during the 8 years sitting next to Barack Obama.
Trump campaign praising the president's fight for the unborn.
This is something that he's committed to, that he remains committed to. It's not only a campaign promise, it's something he feels and believes in, and his record reflects that.
Also tonight, coronavirus blood tests. The FDA says some sellers made false claims about their accuracy. Those companies will now have to show that they work. Tracy?
All right, thank you, Owen. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. Our U.S. senators returned to Capitol Hill today while members of the House are still working remotely. One congressional leader is angling for House lawmakers to return sooner than scheduled. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports. Eric?
That's right, Tracy. Despite D.C.'s stay-at-home order, the U.S. Senate was open for business today. But the Republicans on the House side, they're crying foul. They say if they don't get back to work soon, then they're going to catch heat from their constituents being on the sidelines during this epidemic pandemic.
We want to see government opened up.
House GOP leader Kevin McCarthy says to get the House back to work, bring back committees first.
We cannot sit back and say we're not going to meet again until we have some other big $1 trillion bill to come back and just vote on. That's denying Americans their voice in this process.
Leader McCarthy and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell are pushing for employer liability safeguards in the next coronavirus aid bill. Quote, Americans on the front lines of this fight must receive strong protections from frivolous lawsuits. Senator Chuck Schumer responded by criticizing Senate Republicans for, quote, protecting big business from legal liability. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says $1 trillion more is needed for state and local governments in the next aid bill. Democrats also want funding for food nutrition assistance, mail-in voting, and broadband internet access.
We call for investing $80 billion to deploy a secure and resilient broadband infrastructure to expand access for communities nationwide.
Senator Marco Rubio warns a third round of funding for the Small Business Paycheck Protection Program will soon be needed.
Who has not gotten it that still needs it? Is it still the independent contractors who had a 7-day late start on this? Are there still even smaller micro businesses that haven't gotten access to it? The answer to that question will determine what the scope for a round 3 would look like.
House GOP leader Kevin McCarthy says that he also supports rapid testing up on Capitol Hill. He even wants rapid testing for us reporters who cover up there at Capitol Hill. That's contrary to what leaders in both parties have to say on the Senate side. You may recall just this past weekend they turned down President Trump's offer to have rapid testing up at the Capitol. Tracy?
Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reporting. Thank you, Eric. A 6-week lockdown in India was supposed to end today, but the government is extending it for another 2 weeks. Workers sprayed disinfectant to sanitize slums in Mumbai in order to slow the spread, that is, of coronavirus. The extension of the lockdown in India means schools, malls, and churches will stay closed until at least May 17th. Officials in Jordan announced more lifting of restrictions on businesses as of Wednesday. Most shops and stores have been closed for almost 7 weeks. However, the government is ordering schools, mosques, and swimming pools to remain closed. Italy officially starts phase 2 in easing lockdown restrictions. Hundreds of Italians headed to parks today after nearly 2 months of quarantine. Traffic picked up at Rome's rail station as some went back to work. Families were also able to return to the graves of loved ones they lost. So far, Italy has recorded over 200,000 COVID-19 cases and nearly 30,000 deaths. Francesco Holmes, cultural mediator at Caritas Refugee Project in the northern Italian province of Lodi, joins us now. Francesco, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Now that phase 2 of easing restrictions started today, how are people in northern Italy feeling?
Well, today is, as you said, is the first day of the second phase. And people are, there's a lot of disappointment because I think people mainly thought that this was the end. People could just go out and we could resume our lives. However, obviously, this is not the case. There's only a few small variations, such as basically we can go visit our relatives, but we cannot leave our regions, the regions where we live, and only few people can go to work again. So it's still, it's the phase where we're supposed to learn to coexist with this threat. Really, it's not the end.
I know that your region was one of the hardest hit in Italy. You've been working closely with the refugees, too, during this time. What are some of the challenges that you've faced with the restrictions in place?
Well, the challenges that my colleagues and I faced in working with refugees are entirely based. The nature of our work is built on trust, really, between us and our guests. Now, that trust is really possible with physical proximity. This is the way you build trust. And because we couldn't really be there anymore, we had some issues in some hard times in gaining and maintaining trust within the community that we try to aid. And we just had to find new ways of getting to these people. And so a lot of it is about information, just conveying information, just like since the beginning is the same thing, same stuff. And the rest is really just going, basically risking and going there ourselves, because it's very hard to keep track of and keep rules maintained in the camp if you're not physically there.
Well, I know this has been a learning experience for all of us living through this pandemic. What is something that you specifically learned from this experience?
I learned that one has to, in a situation like this, which is incredibly hard to manage, one has to be incredibly responsible. Like, you need to be humble and responsible and think of how you can aid your society. So you have a twofold role. So what I learned is just to be strong, be patient, and definitely I will always fear this. So I see a lot of people that stop fearing, they get used to it, and get sloppy. It's bad. You have to keep up the attention.
Thank you for everything that you do. We really appreciate it. Francesco Holmes, cultural mediator at Caritas Refugee Project. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Coming up, Pope Francis makes an appeal for unity among churches. And the Supreme Court is set to make history. We'll explain. Pope Francis issues a message of unity, reminding the faithful that they are all brothers and sisters in Christ.
Tutti abbiamo un unico pastore, Gesù.
At his daily mass at the Vatican, the Holy Father said there is no us and them. Everyone belongs to the same flock with only one shepherd, Jesus Christ. Pope Francis added being stuck in our own ideas can create divisions in our communities, and we must always remember that Jesus died for everyone, the good and the bad. While the Holy Father is accepting the resignation of Bishop Daniel Conlon, who took a medical leave of absence last December. Bishop Conlon was appointed to the Diocese of Joliet, Illinois in 2011. Last December, the 71-year-old took a medical leave for unspecified health problems. And you can read the bishop's statement on his health at our sister publication, CatholicNewsAgency.com. Don Shula, the winningest coach in pro football history, has died. He led the Miami Dolphins to the only perfect season in NFL history, set a league record with 347 victories, and coached in 6 Super Bowls. He was also a lifelong Catholic and supporter of Catholic education. He even considered becoming a priest. Shula died at his home in Florida today. He was 90 years old. The coronavirus prompts an historic day at the Supreme Court. Today, for the very first time, the justices heard arguments by telephone. Correspondent Mark Irons reports. Mark?
Tracy, cameras are not allowed inside for Supreme Court proceedings. But today, in unprecedented fashion, we were able to listen in live to the start of a new round of cases, which will include an ongoing fight over religious liberty.
Oh, yay. Oh, yay. Oh, yay.
The traditional call to attention live for the world to hear.
Case 1946, the United States Patent and Trademark Office versus Booking.com.
Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts began questioning in a case involving Booking.com and if the travel website can trademark its name. Lawyers on both sides argued their case.
A generic term is never entitled to trademark protection.
If you go down this road of thinking that certain words are off limits, I just think you're creating a real mess.
Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, who rarely asked questions, did today.
Could Booking acquire an 800 number? That's a vanity number.
Before the coronavirus hit, one of the last cases argued inside the court involved an abortion law in Louisiana. Pro-lifers rallied prior to social distance restrictions.
This case just makes it clear how extreme abortion advocates are if they don't even support a law like this that has nothing to do with overturning Roe or with limiting abortion and is about women getting the emergency care that they need when a complication arises.
Upcoming oral arguments will focus on religious liberty, including an ongoing fight over whether or not the Little Sisters of the Poor should be required to include contraceptive coverage in their health care plans.
The president of the Beckett Fund, the law firm representing the Little Sisters, told me today he hopes and prays, along with the sisters, that this will be the final chapter in what has been years-long litigation, and that the justices will finally put this case to rest and give the sisters that religious exemption from the contraceptive mandate. Tracy, oral arguments in that case are scheduled for this Wednesday.
Well, thank you so much, Mark. Correspondent Mark Irons reporting for us tonight. For healthcare professionals on the front lines of the continuing battle against COVID-19, there are growing concerns about the toll the pandemic is taking on their mental health. Joining me now on Skype to talk more about this is Dr. Gregory Popcak. He is director of CatholicCounselors.com. He is also the author of Unworried, A Life Without Anxiety. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Doctor.
Thank you, Tracy.
I know healthcare professionals face a great deal of pressure on a daily basis, just under ordinary circumstances. How has the COVID-19 pandemic magnified those stresses?
Well, the long hours, the limited resources, and the uncertainty about how to treat this disease and how bad it's really going to be have, I think, ratcheted up the normal stress that most healthcare workers experience on a daily basis.
Do you think there's a reluctance on the part of doctors and nurses to admit the impact that this is having on them psychologically, or do you think they even realize the impact because they're so caught up in this moment of treating patients?
Yeah, I think healthcare workers tend to see themselves as healthcare givers, not healthcare receivers, unfortunately, and because of that, there does tend to be a fairly high rate of burnout and compassion fatigue in the industry in general. And burnout is when work loses its sense of meaning, right? And compassion fatigue is when we care so much that our own tank runs dry. And because healthcare workers tend to drive themselves to care for people so much, they tend not to notice when their own tank is running empty. And because of that, there's a greater risk for people to experience things like depression, anxiety disorders, and the like. And of course, there's also a bias, remarkably, in the healthcare industry against seeking mental health help because it's both seen as a personal weakness, and also state boards actually ask about mental health history on medical licensing exams. So there's a strong disincentive in the profession to seek proper care at the right time.
I know a recent study of healthcare workers in China found that many of them are reporting symptoms of depression and anxiety after treating COVID-19 patients in that country. Do you think there's a lesson there for us here in the United States?
Yeah, no question. I think that we should expect a similar experience for healthcare workers in this country. And it's a warning that the people who are on the front lines do need to, first of all, do what they can to take care of themselves. To create a sense of community within their own units so that they're making sure to really look out for each other as well as looking out for their patients. It's going to be important to find ways to remind themselves about why they're doing this and why it's important. As I said, burnout is the result of work minus meaning. And whenever you're just driving yourself for 12, 14, 16 hours a day, you can start to feel like a cog rather than a care provider. And so reminding yourself of why you're doing what you're doing and the good that you're able to do is incredibly important. And then, of course, finally, making sure that you're paying attention to your own mental health needs and seeking help, even though there is a stigma against it in the profession.
What do you think can be done here in this country to support our caregivers? And what role do you think faith can play in that?
Well, I think first of all, we already are beginning to make sure that we're seeing them as heroes and applauding the work they're doing and doing our best to support them emotionally on social media and in other ways. I think continuing to stay home so that we can make sure that we make their load a little bit lighter and can give them the opportunity that they need to take care of themselves. And I do think, of course, praying for them is incredibly important and remembering that during this time, that if you are a healthcare worker, to remember to reach out for those spiritual resources. The fact is, spiritual tools of coping have been shown in study after study to help improve resilience and help people both resist depression and anxiety and bounce back more quickly from anxiety. So making sure to get that time in prayer, making sure to get that spiritual support from colleagues and from spiritual mentors is just incredibly important. So making sure to latch on those resources that our faith can give to us.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today and talking about this very important subject. We really appreciate it. Dr. Gregory Popcak, thanks again for your insights.
A pleasure, Tracy. Thank you.
Up next, an update on religious freedom in China. And Pope Francis reminds the faithful true peace comes from listening to God. Well, tonight we take a closer look at religious persecution in China. The country once again highlighted in this year's annual report by the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom as a country of particular concern for its government's violations of religious liberty. Joining me now on Skype to talk more about China's human rights abuses is USCIRF Commissioner Gary Bauer. Gary, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Great to be with you as always.
I know that you said the Chinese government is, quote, a regime that fears religion. What did you mean by that? And how do you think that carries over into its treatment of people of faith in China, especially religious minorities?
Well, Tracy, the Chinese Communist Party has literally declared war on all religions. It's certainly the case with Christians, who they've been persecuting for over 70 years. It's also true of Muslims, Tibetan Buddhists, followers of the Falun Gong, a spiritual movement. The Chinese communists insist that their citizens not have any loyalty higher than the loyalty to the Communist Party. And last year, one of the reasons we once again have cited Communist China as being one of the worst persecutors, last year Communist China said to all the religions that they would have to promote the values and the principles of the Chinese Communist Party. Well, one of those principles is that there is no God. So how in the world could any Christian in China follow that order from the Chinese Communist Party, let alone the followers of any other religious faith? So this is a terrible situation in China, and it's something that should concern the entire world.
Gary, how is this crackdown on religion impacting Christians specifically?
Well, they literally have gone into the churches, they do this regularly, and ordered crosses to be taken down. Recently, they told all the churches that nothing physically can be higher in the church than the flag of the Chinese Communist government. So those, again, are outrageous things. But even beyond that, Christians are being told that any significant decision that they have to make in their churches must first be run by the Chinese Communist Party. It's an outrageous situation, and I really believe that the United Nations, international institutions, as well as the United States, has to keep the pressure on the Chinese communists to block this. And I think it's really important for us all to remember, I'm not talking about the Chinese people. Hundreds of millions of them are wonderful people, but they too are under the control of the Chinese communists and have to bow to their Chinese communist leaders.
Gary, I want to go back to what you mentioned about the crosses coming down. Can you talk a little bit more about that, and what kind of message do you think that sends?
Well, when they go into the churches and tell Christians to take down the most important symbol of our faith, by doing that, they're just reasserting to those Christians that we're going to make your lives miserable. We're not going to allow you to do the things that your faith calls for. That's why in many places in China, Christians refuse to join the government-recognized and in some cases government-controlled churches, and instead they practice their faith in secret, even going so far as to have to baptize their own children in the middle of the night in streams or rivers, rather than allowing anybody from the Chinese communists to see them following the practices of our faith.
Well, Gary, thank you so much for coming on and shedding more light on the subject. We really appreciate it. Gary Bauer, Commissioner with the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. Thank you again, Gary.
You're welcome.
Pope Francis underlines the importance of being able to distinguish the voices of good and evil.
Invece la voce di Dio parla al presente.
Celebrating World Day of Prayer for Vocations yesterday at the Vatican, the Holy Father said the voice of God is always present. It encourages and consoles us. He never imposes, but instead makes suggestions. And it is through listening to God that we find true peace. But the voice of the devil makes us turn inwards and tells us to only think of ourselves. A reminder that EWTN broadcasts Mass throughout the day. Mass airs at 8 a.m., noon, and 7 p.m. Eastern. We're also airing other special programming, including the Pope's Daily Mass, and you can find our schedule at EWTN.com. There you will also find Eucharistic adoration throughout the day. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. We're back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night and God bless.